It's 8:37 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Brian Wilson, and we are joined now by Reggie Littlejohn. She is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. This is an international coalition designed to expose and oppose forced abortion, gendercide, and sexual slavery in China. And it's so good to have you, Ms. Littlejohn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Well, the headlines are China rescinds one-child policy, and I've seen some journalists in the left praising China for their change of heart. But is that really what's happening here, and do they deserve praise?
Well, there is no change of heart at all. Basically, what has happened is that China has moved from a policy where many people could have a second child to now everyone can have a second child. But what has not changed is the coercion with which the one-child policy is enforced. So, right now, a woman has to have a birth permit for the first child and the second child,
Wow.
or she can end up with a forced abortion, forced sterilization, forced contraception, and the entire infrastructure of coercion and surveillance over women under the one-child policy is going to remain in place under the two-child policy.
A birth permit.
That is correct.
The government gives you a permit to bear a child.
Exactly. Like, we would have a permit to drive. You have to have a permit to have a baby in China.
What happens? What happens if you have a baby without the government's permission in China?
Okay, if you actually have the baby, then what a lot of people do is hide their baby, and then what happens is that baby will not have household registration or hukou, so they have no official existence. They will not have a birth certificate. They will not be entitled to education or health care. They will not be able to get a passport. They will not be able to travel. So they're basically like illegal aliens within their own land. That's if they hide the baby.
Well, but the difference is illegal aliens in this country do get education and health care and all of those things. In China, you nothing. And by the way, if you don't go to a government doctor in China, you don't go to a doctor because all of the doctors are government doctors. It's a horrible situation.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what's interesting to me about this is what seems to be driving this. I mean, the reason that the one-child policy was imposed in the first place was that they felt like the population was growing too quickly to support. In other words, they didn't want people to go hungry, so they were going to put limits on how many kids you could have. And now what they're saying is, well, we need to have more kids because the cost of labor is going up because there aren't as many workers as we need to get the work done. So it's all about, these policies, social engineering policies designed about whether or not they can feed the people or whether or not we can make goods for a cheap price.
Yeah, they're a resource.
Yeah.
It's all economics. It's all treating people as commodities, and that's not. It's not like the Chinese government has suddenly repented or grown a heart or now has a conscience. It's that they see that they have created a demographic disaster on three fronts. Number one is the labor shortage that you mentioned. Number two, they don't have the young population to support their rapidly aging population. And number three, they have a shortage of women because under the one-child policy, and I believe also under the two-child policy, girls will be selectively aborted because people feel that if they're going to have one child or only two children, their only child or at least one of their two children has to be a boy, so they will selectively abort the girls. So now that's given rise to a situation where there's got like 37 million more men living in China than women, and that's driving human trafficking and sexual slavery as well.
And sometimes when the girls are born, they end up in orphanages because they are abandoned.
Well, they're lucky if they end up in an orphanage if they're abandoned, because a lot of them are just abandoned out in the field and they just die. That's why we have this huge gender imbalance.
Oh.
I got to ask you, Reggie Littlejohn, your organization, Women's Rights Without Frontiers, it's a nonpartisan group. But I have to ask you, just from your expert perspective, Hillary Clinton is often applauded for her stance on international women's rights, and they often point to a speech that she gave in China as Secretary of State in, I think it was 2009 when she gave this speech. Excuse me. No. It was the 1995 speech. She was the first lady at the time. It's always called a landmark speech that she gave at the World Conference on Women in Beijing. Did anything actually change because of that speech? And did the Chinese government actually change anything about how they treat women because Hillary Clinton gave that landmark speech?
Well, no, nothing has changed as a result of the speech, and actually, Hillary Clinton was a disappointment to me when she was Secretary of State because she made it very clear and, in fact, stated in so many words that she was not going to let human rights get in the way of the trade relationship with China. So during the years after that speech, Chinese human rights plummeted, and the reason was that her husband gave China most favored nation status and delinked it from human rights. So before that, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat, our relationship with China was always related to human rights. Then, Bill Clinton gave them everything they wanted, delinked it from human rights, and the human rights in China have been in a tailspin ever since.
Yeah, so she gets the image of giving this tough speech in Beijing that delivered no results, but actual policy of her husband when she was First Lady actually hurt women's rights in China more than anything else before it.
Hurt all human rights, including
all human rights. Yeah.
Just one other question. I mean, and since 1999, some 71,000 children, mostly girls, have been adopted from China and brought to this country. What is this likely to do to those people out there who want to adopt children from China in the days ahead?
Well, China started clamping down on international adoption about 10 years ago, so I don't think this is going to affect that. But if people want to help girls in China, we have a Save a Girl campaign where we find out about women who are pregnant with girls and who are scheduled themselves for an abortion or who have given birth to a girl and are being pressured to abandon her to death. And we go to their doors and say, do not abort, do not abandon your baby because she's a girl, she's a precious daughter. We will give you a monthly stipend for a year to help you keep your daughter. We have overwhelming success rate and have saved almost 200 girls. So if you want to help girls, you can help their mothers keep them in China.
Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org. It's a great, and just a very quick follow-up, Reggie Littlejohn. You said that girls are going to be selectively aborted. I'm a father of 4. I know for a fact that you don't know what the gender of your child is really until they're about 4 months in the womb. Does that mean we're going to have forced abortions based on gender selection at 22, 23 weeks?
That's right.
All
of these sex-selective abortions are, by definition, late-term abortions.
These are all children that we know could live in an NICU at that moment of their lives.
Many of them are. That's right.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Reggie Littlejohn, to shed some very clear light on the story out of China and their amending, but certainly not rescinding, their one-child policy.